If you can say, don't vote Democrat because we'll end up like the Europeans, that's actually not a bad argument in American politics.
Doesn't kind of Trump have a point here, which is if we can't collectively get our act together, it is going to be America first, or America doing what it likes and everyone else playing catch up.
I'm just surprised that George Osborne, the pro-European Remainer, kind of goes to this position.
We've had 3 or 4 years to come up with Europe's Ukraine plan.
I think you spent too long with JD Vance. I think that's the problem. The new America First national security strategy rather arrived out of the blue. I think late in one evening at the end of last week, there was a similar document published in the first Trump administration. In fact, I think there is a legal requirement. There was a congressional act 30, 40 years ago requiring this to be published by every president during their presidency. And but it did cause a bit of a storm.
Yeah, I mean, it's only about 30-something pages long, and I don't want to turn people off this podcast, but I would actually recommend people who are interested in politics just read it. It won't take them long, take them 20 minutes to read it or so, because it's actually very clearly written. And I guess the theme of it, or the sort of flavor of it, is best summed up by a reply that Donald Trump gave in an interview he did, I think, alongside the publication of this strategy to Politico, when he was asked about the fact that in this national security document, it is scathing about Europe, about Western Europe, about its future. It essentially says it's facing an existential crisis and needs to get its act together. But rather than read out the words in the document, why not listen to the man himself? This is Donald Trump in his Politico interview.
Okay, I know the good leaders, I know the bad leaders, I know the smart ones, I know the stupid ones. You got some real stupid ones too. But they're not doing a good job. Europe is not doing a good job in many ways. They're not doing a good job.
I want to ask
They
you
talk
about
too
that.
much, and they're not producing. We're talking about Ukraine. They talk, but they don't produce. I think they're weak, but I also think that they want to be so politically correct. I think they don't know what to do.
We should just contrast this to the first 2 paragraphs of the actual document. The first sentence is, over the past 9 months, we have brought our nation and the world back from the brink of catastrophe and disaster. And the second paragraph, no administration in history has achieved so dramatic a turnaround in so short of time. I think the Donald Trump's boasting about his achievements stands in marked contrast to his undiplomatically frank view of European leadership.
Yeah, and there's an interesting paragraph in the document where he says, or rather, it's he writes the forward, and then there's the kind of administration document behind it. And it says this: President Trump's foreign policy is pragmatic without being pragmatist, realistic without being realist, principled without being idealistic, muscular without being hawkish, and restrained without being dovish. It is not grounded in traditional political ideology. It is motivated above all by what works for America, or in 2 words, America first. And it goes through the different regions of the world. And look, the ambition is absolutely clear, which is to be the strongest, most militarily powerful, most economically dominant nation on earth, to retain a technological edge over all of the rivals. And then it goes through the regions. I mean, one of the things that's been really controversial is it doesn't signal out Russia as a huge threat in the same way that, a document, I think, from the UK or France or whatever would. But I guess I'm going to be a little bit provocative here because it's caused absolute outrage.
Before you do, George, given that you chose to read that out, could you just explain to me, because obviously you've highlighted this, what does it mean to say pragmatic but not pragmatist?
I think what he's trying to say is, this is not the foreign policy of a sort of, globalist elite.
Realistic without being realist?
Yes.
Honestly, does it mean anything?
Well, it might not. And that's actually what I'm coming on to, because I guess the question I've got is, it's written in a way, and it's very clearly written, and also it's quite interesting. At the beginning, it explains what a strategy is, which is, I think quite a clever device. But I was asking myself, okay, it's obviously very different from what a President Obama would have said, or indeed a President Bush, maybe Bush Jr. and Senior. But how different is it in practice? I mean, to what degree are we kidding ourselves if we say that American presidents have in the past, been bound into a sort of global order that they haven't put America first? And I was just thinking over, my lifetime, a set of decisions that America has made, which are essentially pretty kind of unilateral. I mean, the most obvious of which was the Iraq War. Now, I know Britain took part in it, but they defied the United Nations. France and Germany attempted to veto them at the UN, but they went ahead with the Iraq War. If you look at my teenage years, there was the Grenada invasion by Ronald Reagan, the taking out of General Noriega in Panama, which is actually not unlike, you could argue, what's kind of looks like it might be happening in Venezuela. And, and then even you go back to when I was born, there was the Vietnam War. And go back to before I was born, there was Suez. And those are a series of presidents like Eisenhower, Nixon, Reagan, Bush, who essentially have operated on an America first principle. And if you just sort of try and dig behind the language and the rhetoric and the very provocative message to the allies that Donald Trump delivers, I guess the question is, in practice, how different is it from what's gone before?
The interesting thing about the document is it sort of seeks to critique the past, to critique past American foreign policy. It's very dismissive of American foreign policy being kind of too globalist, allowing kind of international migration, institutions which become un-American, cooperation which undermines the American national interest. But look, I think I agree with you that at every stage in the post-war period, there has always been an American first policy, and they have shaped and driven doctrine and institutions to achieve outcomes which, as it happens, have often been good for the West more generally, but were undoubtedly America first. So I kind of agree with you that maybe they do protest a bit too much. It's slightly odd when you think of the Trump approach to foreign policy and politics more generally, to think that a big statement of doctrine and philosophy matters, because actually the thing about Donald Trump is he is the realist and the pragmatist. I mean, he will do what he thinks is the right thing to do at any point in time to get the best outcome as he sees it. I'm not sure if he's going to be hugely referring back to his national security statement as a sort of a set of guiding principles which will shape the individual decisions he takes. If you look at the way in which he's approached China or Russia and Ukraine, I mean, the interesting thing is, to get outcomes, he often seems to move from very different principal positions, almost hour by hour or day by day. So I'm not sure if I fully understand the purpose of this document, although I'm going to revise that. I think there is actually a purpose to this, but it may not be the purpose which ostensibly it sets out to deliver, which is, a big statement of American foreign policy. I think it's actually all really about domestic American politics in the next election. And that's the lens through which you have to see it. Lots of Europeans have been very shocked by this. There's actually, as we speak, an urgent question going on in Parliament from a Labour MP, Mike Weston, demanding a government response to this document. But I would say that the thing to do is to stay calm and try to understand what's going on here. If you look within the document, it is kind of well written, but it's also a bit contradictory in different sections. It slightly feels like different people had their bit. So there is clearly a strong Southern America focus in American foreign policy. It's called the new Trump version of the Monroe Doctrine. We will take control of the threats and the opportunities around the Americas, and Russia, China, get out of our backyard, from the administration, which is currently has just taken hostage a Venezuelan oil tanker because they are trying to crack down on the drug trade. This, to me, is like classic Marco Rubio, showing that at the State Department, he's a strong man sorting things out in his backyard. That is part of his political appeal. And, as a Florida senator.
He's a Cuban American, isn't he?
That is the Rubio bit.
But by the way, that's not so different from the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the involvement in Nicaragua.
I agree.
The Sandinistas, all of that from previous administrations, right?
Not disagreeing at all. You then go to China. What was really interesting about China is that there's very little about China, the political or security threat. It's much more about the economic relationship. That feels to me like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary's bit, that he's kind of set out his stall, which is, I need kind of growth and dynamism in the American economy, and actually going to war with China is a bad thing. We should double down on the economic relationship. I mean, it's surprising how little there is about the China challenge, but that maybe reflects that Treasury perspective.
However, there's actually a rather classic American doctrine here, which is we're going to build a military capable of denying aggression anywhere in the first island chain. That's basically China can't attack Taiwan. And we're not going to allow anyone to take control of the South China Seas. That again is, pretty classic, like the United States is not going to give up its control or its hegemonic position in East Asia.
Totally agree. So there is consistency and continuity, but actually compared to the first Trump administration China statement of policy, this is less aggressive and more economically opening up. I wonder actually whether the real Trump doctrine is what he wants is a big political accommodation, the G2, America and China, and let us find an economic accommodation. Let's understand each other's security needs, but let's not have conflict and aggression. That's kind of what feels to me is to like the underpinning in all of that.
He's got a big state visit to China in 2026, which is probably going to be the sort of geopolitical, the known geopolitical highlight of the year.
Then you go to Europe. That is where all the headlines have come. And I mean, it's actually quite stunning when you first look at it. I mean, this is what the document says about Europe. It says, it talks about economic decline in Europe. But then it says, but Europe's real problems are even deeper. This economic decline is eclipsed by the real and more stark prospect of civilizational erasure. It goes on to say, should present trends continue, the continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less. What it basically says, I mean, this is sort of white ethno-nationalism, is basically saying that white Christian Europe is going to disappear. There's going to be civilizational erasure. And it actually says in the document that part of American foreign policy is to intervene to cultivate resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations. I mean, that is, at first sight, a step beyond the way in which American presidents would have talked about Europe. I mean, they wouldn't have been talking about intervening within European politics to stop civilizational erasure. Of course, George, in the 40s, they would have been intervening to stop the rise of communism, and then in the 2000s to stop the rise of terrorism. So there is a continuity there, but the language is very different and much more about race. And of course, what it does is it actually, and this is my third kind of influence, if there's Rubio in America and there's Bessent in China, this here is the JD Vance section. He made that speech at the Munich Security Conference at the beginning of the year, and that was the first time we heard the language which is so strongly echoed in this document. Let's just have a quick listen.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
See, this is the point where I think you could say, oh my goodness, this is a massive break with the past. This is a different American approach to foreign policy, intervening because they think that we are becoming less like them, civilizational erasure. And I think there would be some European leaders popping up and saying this is a catastrophe, it's a call to arms, this is a disaster. When I look at that, that says to me that this is actually a document about the next presidential election. This is JD Vance setting out his stall in the same way that Marco Rubio was setting out his stall when it comes to Latin America. If you're in opposition, you have to run against failures within the government you're taking on. And so Trump won the last election by pointing out Biden's failures on immigration, very hard to run in the next presidential election against the government because they are the government. So what do they have to do? They have to set up a bogeyman, the threat. If you elect a Democrat president, we will go like the Europeans. We will go down the road of civilizational erasure. We will kind of lose our essential Americanness. I just read this and think that this is the Vance pitch for 2028.
Okay, very good observation. But I would say some of the questions that this document and Donald Trump's interview with Politico has raised, and some of the reaction you've had from European leaders, the Germans outraged and so on. Interestingly, the British Downing Street, didn't want to get into this fight at all. So the statement from Keir Starmer's spokesperson was, Keir Starmer has a good relationship with Donald Trump and looks forward to continuing to work with him on issues of mutual interest. They weren't getting into the civilizational erasure debate.
By the way, quite rightly, because we are not the audience. The audience is American voters who JD Vance and others are trying to scare, and they need an external bogeyman. I just don't think that I just don't think we should take this too seriously. We should engage with Donald Trump issue by issue on trade or on Ukraine or on the Middle East. But if you read this language and think this is actually an outward-facing national security strategy telling us how America is going to behave, I think it's much, much more internal and political.
Okay, but it does echo quite a lot of European self-doubt and soul-searching about Europe's inability to coordinate, Europe's weakness on, in terms of cooperation on military power. I mean, as the document points out, European allies enjoy a significant hard power advantage over Russia. And yet, they've not been able to deter Russia in Ukraine, or didn't deter Russia from invading Ukraine.
Which is your continuity point, because actually American administrations have been saying versions of that for years, and rightly so. And actually, it turns out Donald Trump, by a different rhetorical approach, is forcing European leaders to realize they've got to get their act sorted out. So I agree with you on that.
And is it so different, all the stuff they're saying about Europe becoming unrecognizable from Keir Starmer's language about an island of strangers? I mean, is that, I know Keir Starmer backed off that language, but you've had other prominent left-wing politicians, and of course politicians on the right, talking about how rapidly our societies are changing, how mass immigration is, destroying our sense of nationhood and all that kind of thing. I mean, so, I'm just saying that quite a lot of the things he's saying are being echoed by European politicians at the moment.
Well, they are certainly being echoed by American politicians as well. You see, the thing is, if you take the phrase Muslim no-go areas, Donald Trump has said this. I remember going to Mar-a-Lago with the BBC back in 2017, and a Trump supporter saying to me within the Mar-a-Lago place, she said, you're from London. Are you safe there? Aren't there Muslim no-go areas? I think Donald Trump may believe there are Muslim no-go areas in London.
Ed, don't you think it goes further than that? I'm very struck on my trips to America how you get people who are not at all kind of rabid Trumpian people who say, my God, the situation is so bad in London, and you haven't
They think Birmingham has been taken over by Sharia law.
I know. You get kind of Democrat voices saying this to you as well.
Yes, but I don't think JD Vance believes that, do you? JD Vance is an international, well-traveled person. He spends, the summer having meetings with you in the Cotswolds and meeting David Lammy in Chevening. Unlike Donald Trump, he's probably walked the streets. In no way does JD Vance think there are Muslim no-go areas in London, because it's obviously nonsense. And we all just think it's a bit of a joke. They can't be serious. But actually, as you say, enough people believe it in America. Is now sufficiently widespread that if you want to play politics domestically, actually using the European bogeyman is a quite effective way of saying, if you can say, don't vote Democrat because we'll end up like the Europeans, that's actually not a bad argument in American politics, even though we actually think it's a little bit. I mean, look, I accept your point that growth is slow, but actually I would feel safer walking the streets in London than I would in American cities. And those people you're talking about who think there's no-go areas wouldn't understand that for a second, but it's true.
No, fun enough, I'm not sure he does walk the streets of London, but Michael Bloomberg was saying to me yesterday, how clean he thought the city was and how well run it looked, and so on, having spent some days here in London. But look, I mean, we should sort of draw this to a conclusion. But isn't it interesting, the kind of hard case of all of this is Ukraine, because we've got these peace negotiations going on that are being conducted by essentially, Donald Trump's peace negotiator and his son-in-law, so Witkoff and Jared Kushner, is being done directly with the Americans, and then they're speaking to the Ukrainians. And Europe, including the UK, is kind of playing, a secondary role, is the politest way of putting it. I mean, yes.
Are you sure about that?
Zelensky was in London this week, in Downing Street, with the French and German leaders as well. The European Union is inching, years after the conflict started, towards using Russian frozen assets to try and to raise a loan that they can then provide aid to Ukraine with, although that is something as well, by the way, Donald Trump is not very keen on. It's just, where's Europe's plan? Where's Europe's response? Where is, and now Europe, I'm including the UK here. Why is our plan for the Ukrainian peace? Where's our plan for the Ukrainian post-war resettlement? And it doesn't kind of Trump have a point here, which is if we can't collectively get our act together, and he makes a similar point about our allies in the Indo-Pacific as well, then it is going to be America first, or America doing what it likes and everyone else playing catch up.
I'm just surprised that George Osborne, the pro-European Remainer, kind of goes to this position.
I would love there to be more coordination, and I think if we were in the EU, we'd be able to play much more of a coordinating, leading role. And I fully applaud Keir Starmer's attempts to kind of try and create a common European position. I'm just saying but it's a bit late. We've had 3 or 4 years to come up with Europe's Ukraine plan.
You are right on the growth agenda. And when it comes to European security, cooperation and funding, I mean, it was pretty woeful in your time, the time I was in government, and today. So you are right, that has not been addressed. But if you take the particular issue of Ukraine and this negotiation, go back to the original peace plan 2 weeks ago. In that peace plan, Ukraine was not going to join NATO, not going to join the European Union. There was going to be no foreign troops on the ground in Ukraine. There was going to be not only Ukraine giving up to Russia territory which Russia had taken, but giving up more territory than Russia had taken at that point. It was going to cede territory it was currently holding. And actually, the current deal on the table, as far as we can see, is a substantial rolling back from that position. As of today, who will reject this deal? It won't be Zelensky who'll reject it, it'll be Putin, because this is not a deal which is in his interests. Has that happened because Donald Trump has been persuaded by Zelensky, or has it happened because Donald Trump and the American negotiations in those conversations with European leaders have been persuaded that this is a bad deal, which would not only be bad for Ukraine and for Europe, but for America too?
Oh, well, I
think in the Middle East, it's really hard to make that case. But in Ukraine, I think you can make the case that the position has shifted quite a long way.
I would pray in the Ed Balls doctrine that it's always domestic, domestic, domestic. I think you'll find it was the Republican reaction in places like the Senate to that original Russian, the original 28-point plan that looked like it had been drafted quite a lot by Moscow, that actually sent the administration into reverse.
And Marco Rubio, the state secretary, saying very critical things about it that weekend. So look, I agree with you. All I'm saying is that the deal shifted during these European talks. And the Osborne thing is to say, oh yeah, but as a matter of principle, Europe must be irrelevant. I just think you spent too long. I think you spent too long with JD Vance. I think that's the problem.
Not long enough, you're saying.
He's got in your head, well, I think you need to spend more time with him and persuade him. You and David Lammy need to do a number on him. Because the thing is, unlike Donald Trump, he doesn't believe this rubbish, but he says it because he thinks it's good American politics. And the worst thing which we could do is take it too seriously and get all wound up about it and get all angry and have urgent questions and demand summits and have condemnations. You roll your eyes and think, actually, what I want to do is be pragmatic, not a pragmatist. I want to be a realist, but not realistic. Just realistic. Which way, every way around it was. But anyway, you know what I mean. Basically, that is the right place to be. Yeah. Take Donald Trump on his own terms. don't start reading his long security strategies and taking them as kind of gospel, because I don't think he does. So why should we?
Very interesting. Anyway, I do recommend people read, even if they don't read the whole 30 pages or so, just read the first few pages.
Work out the bits you think are Donald Trump, the bits of JD Vance, the bits of Marco Rubio, the bits of Scott Bessent, the bits written by other parts of his political world. It feels to me like there's multi-authors to this document.
Yeah, and have a nice Ferrero Rocher while you're taking it all in.